With one big swing, DJ Stewart delivered a victory to the New York Mets. I'll talk about the game and this lineup moving forward on today's edition of Locked On Mets.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnMLB and use the code, all in lowercase, LockedOnMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. The New York Mets even up their series against the Chicago Cubs on Tuesday night. Sean Manaea took the mound for the Mets, and it was a very Manaea-like performance. 5 innings pitched, 3 hits, walked 4, but somehow only allowed 1 run. Pitched himself out of a bases loaded spot. He just has this way of walking the tightrope lately, and it's working for the Mets. You look at his season up to this point. He peaked in his first start. First start, we thought, man, Sean Manaea might be the ace, and now we've seen since that Luis Severino has been the far more consistent pitcher. That's why we can't overreact to the first start of the season. But Manaea in that start allowed just 1 hit, walked 2, struck out 8 over 6 scoreless innings pitched. Since then, he has now recorded an out in the 6th inning. It has been 5 and dive pretty much every time. He had one brutal start where he didn't get out of the 4th inning against the Royals, gave up 8 runs, only 6 of them being earned. That was the one bad start. You had the one great start early. Then every other start's been about 5 innings pitched. There was one that was 4 2/3, and it's been 2 runs allowed in one of them, and then 1 run allowed in a couple of them. One start, he didn't allow a run, but the bottom line is he has been a 5 and dive guy. It works for the Mets because their bullpen has been so good. But throughout this season, you hope that Manaea can eventually give you a little bit more length. With that said, throughout this season, in his starts, they lost the first one when he was great. They obviously lost the blow-up start. They've won his other 4 starts. So there is a recipe the Mets are following that is working with Sean Manaea. Now, when it comes to a recipe with their lineup, the Mets are still trying to find the right combination, although everybody is in place now. Starling Marte off of bereavement, Mark Vientos back down to AAA, JD Martinez obviously in full swing now. I think barring injury, this is your Mets team for a while, and it's a good team. It's a deep team. It's a team that should eventually start to hit. We'll talk about that a little bit more throughout the show today, but going through what happened in this game, it was a slog offensively again. First inning, the Mets get a gift run, really. Francisco Lindor gets a base hit. He's picked off, so he should have been thrown out at second base. Luckily for Lindor and the Mets, the throw goes wide, ends up in the outfield. Lindor ends up standing on third base with Pete Alonso up. And Alonso, as the great run producer he is, gets the job done, hits a sacrifice fly. Mets get on the board 1-0. They had a little 2-out rally that brewed after that. JD Martinez, Jeff McNeil each got hits, but they were stranded when Tyrone Taylor grounded out. And then from that point on, it was crickets from the Mets offense. They just could not string anything together until they got another gift in the 6th inning when JD Martinez gets on thanks to an error. And you have another runner come on as Tyrone Taylor gets a hit with 2 outs. Tyrone Taylor got the hit against a righty. Surprise, surprise. Just harking back to yesterday's show where I was pretty upset that Taylor got pinch hit for with a righty on the mound. He's been very good in the situations, but then again, the guy who he got pinch hit for the night prior, DJ Stewart, came up big with a righty on the mound. In this one, Stewart got the start in the outfield. This was his 3rd at bat of the game. He gets a cutter over the heart of the plate, does not miss it, crushes it into the upper tank of right field. We saw a little bat flip, a little stare into the dugout. You love to see it. And that was the day for Stewart. He did his job, one big swing. All right, Harrison Bader coming for defense. And the Mets at that point had a 4-1 lead to protect. And as I already mentioned, that bullpen does a good job protecting leads. Sean Reed-Foley was the first man to pitch after Sean Manaea at this point in a tie game, 1-1. He walked the leadoff man, Christopher Morel, who then stole second base. advanced to third on a ground out. So Sean Reed-Foley had to navigate a runner 90 feet away with less than 2 outs, but he got the strikeout when he needed to, then got a ground out to Pete Alonso to end the inning. And I should mention, Pete Alonso and Brett Beatty at the corners in this game were exceptional defensively. Alonso laying out, making tough plays, fielding hot shots that are really tough down the line, really guarding it well. Brett Beatty coming in on the ball, taking a pop-up out of Francisco Lindor's glove, turning double plays. Just looks so good over at third base. The defense really critical to help Mania get out of some tough spots and to hold that lead late. So you see Sean Reed-Foley was first. Reed Garrett was next. Garrett pitching with the lead. Sean Reed-Foley ends up getting the win in this one. Garrett worked around a leadoff walk and was able to pitch a scoreless inning. Adam Ottavino with another perfect frame. Seems like every time he comes in, it's just 3 up, 3 down, and take a seat, Otto. You've done your job. You got another hold. So great work in the 8th by him. And then Jorge Lopez came out for the 9th. Edwin Diaz, having been used the last couple days, wasn't available. So you go to Lopez in a safe situation, something he's been used to back to his days in Baltimore. He got the job done. Gave up a leadoff double, made us all a little bit scared, but ultimately bend did not break. And it is pretty interesting that Lopez has gotten a lot of these opportunities as sort of the B team closer, I guess. If it was a split squad, he'd be closing the game in Jupiter when the Mets were playing in St. Lucie for spring training. But that's sort of been the deal. He's been the guy to get some of those looks when Diaz isn't available, and he's done well. And that's where I want to actually go to in the next segment here. This Mets bullpen, as much as we can talk about the potential of this lineup, or of course the questions about the starting rotation, which 5 are they eventually going to be able to roll with and everyone gets healthy, how long is Hauser going to be, and all those things that have been hot button topics. The thing that we haven't discussed nearly enough on this show is just how good the bullpen has been and how that has really just widened the margin of error for the Mets and allowed them to come through and win any and all close games late. It's been exceptional. It's been, a whole group of guys that have been stepping up. So I want to talk about this bullpen and why it might just be the best in the National League. So we'll discuss that in just a minute. First, though, today's episode is brought to you by DoorDash. You want to make mom smile for Mother's Day this year? Why don't you start off her day with some beautiful flowers or surprise her with a gift from any of her favorite brands that she loves? Have it all delivered directly to her door the very same day with DoorDash. Get thoughtful gifts that she deserves with the convenience that you need by choosing same-day delivery or schedule a week ahead for when flowers and gifts should arrive to her door with DoorDash. You can shop with savings that would make mom proud with the Dash Pass membership, where you'll save with a $0 delivery fee and reduce service fees on eligible orders from Dash Pass merchants that meet the minimum subtotal. Other fees, including service fees, may apply. Terms apply. Get all your Mother's Day gifts all in one place and get 50% off your next order up to $15 when you spend $15 or more on your next flower, convenience, grocery, or retail order now with the code LOCKEDONMLB. That's code LOCKEDONMLB. Ordering with DoorDash today to get 50% off your next order. Terms apply. Today's episode is also brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is America's #1 fantasy sports app with more than 3 million members. It is the easiest and most exciting way to get in on the action while you watch your favorite sports and players. You just pick more or less than on 2 or more player stats and watch the winnings roll in. And right now, you can combine anyone from the NBA playoffs, the NHL playoffs, baseball. Take your favorite players from the Diamonds. You can pick their strikeouts, RBIs, first inning runs. Take your pick more or less than and add them to your Prize Picks entry today. You can combine them. We're watching the Knicks in the playoffs. Jalen Brunson, more points. That's always a nice add in any of these entries when the Knicks are playing. You can combine them all. You can win big. And with quick withdrawals, easy gameplay, an enormous selection of players and stat types to choose from, Prize Picks is the #1 fantasy sports app. Download the Prize Pick app today. Use the code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, download the Prize Picks app today. Use the code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy with Prize Picks. This Mets bullpen has been nails this year. If you look at the stats, it's pretty jaw-dropping. They have a 2.85 ERA in the season, which is the sixth best in all of baseball and the best mark in the National League by over half a run. Braves are sitting at 3.47 and Mets are at 2.85. Now here's where this gets even more interesting. I was thinking about it and I was like, I look at Jorge Lopez, sub-2 ERA. I look at Adam Ottavino, sub-2 ERA. I know Brooks Raley hasn't given up a run, even though he's now on the IL. And Sean Reed-Foley hasn't given up one since he's come back off the IL. So I see a lot of guys with low ERAs. Edwin Diaz, his 2.53 is almost a bad ERA in this team. And I had to wonder, how is that team ERA above, 2 by a wide margin? And obviously it's going to be all those kind of taxi squad guys. So I wanted to really look under the hood a little bit closer and see, okay, how has that ERA been made up? And let's just try to remove some of these guys who aren't even on the Mets anymore and see what that does. So I looked at Yohan Ramirez. Remember him? 7 earned runs with the Mets. Pull those out of the total. Michael Tonkin gave up 10 runs with the Mets uniform on. Only 4 of them were earned. Cole Sulser, who's still on the 40, gave up 4 earned runs in 3 2/3. And I would imagine when David Peterson and or Kodai Senga are both ready to come back, you might see Cole Sulser be off this roster as well. I think he's a guy, along with Shintaro Fujinami, honestly, that maybe has a tenuous roster spot at the moment. But the point being, when all of that happens, when you remove the 4 runs from Sulser, 4 runs from Tonkin, 7 earned runs from Ramirez, that's 15 runs you remove from the equation. It's also 16 innings pitched. The Mets bullpen ERA would then drop all the way down to 1.90. 1.90. Now, granted, of course, you can do that with any team. Let's take the 3 worst relievers out and swap out the stats. But to me, it's just more evidence of what you have with the guys that are in-house right now. As I mentioned, Raley has not allowed a run. Sean Reed-Foley hasn't allowed a run. Josh Walker, in his 3 appearances, did not allow a run. Reed Garrett leads the Mets in innings pitched, strikeouts, and wins. He has allowed 1 earned run in 15 2/3 innings pitched. He's got a sub-1 ERA right now. He's been spectacular. He's got a lot of shine for it, and rightfully so. With that said, Adam Ottavino deserves some praise here. He gave up a run in each of his first 2 appearances. Since then, he's gone out for 8 scoreless appearances. He's not even allowing many walks or hits either. He has just been so good. Jorge Lopez gave up a run tonight. He's allowed, I think, 3 earned runs all season. He has a 1.88 ERA through 14 1/3 innings pitched, second most used reliever when it comes to workload to only Reed Garrett. Edwin Diaz has allowed the most home runs out of anyone in this bullpen with 2. You had Garrett and Adam Ottavino each allowed 1. You had home runs allowed from Tonkin, Ramirez, and Hartwig. Other than that, the rest of the bullpen has kept the ball in the yard. So you're keeping the ball in the yard, which is a huge, huge reason for the bullpen's success. Don't feel like the bullpen walks a ton of guys either. It's just been refreshing to see. The one disappointment in this pen, quite honestly, outside of the guys that are off the roster that we mentioned, but still, how high were expectations for those guys? Jake Diekman's been the one guy that you can look at and say, yeah, it hasn't been a great year for him so far. He's got a 3.86 ERA. It's not been terrible. But he's just been used a little bit less because the trust clearly isn't there. And maybe you could say the same thing about Drew Smith. Did give up some inherited runs. Now he's on the IL. He's sitting with a 2.70 ERA. So not bad from him either. This bullpen is fantastic right now. And all off season, we were wondering about it. And a lot of time I was just saying, listen, I have faith in David Stern's ability to build a bullpen. And we can't just give it all credit to David Stearns. He came here, he sprinkled his magic dust on the Mets, and all of a sudden they're great. It's a collective effort. Carlos Mendoza deserves a ton of credit with that. He's managed this staff altogether. And then Reed Garrett, that was part of the scouting that was left behind from Billy Epler. And not to say that was a Billy Epler signing entirely or claiming him off waivers last year. But in the media session David Stearns had on Monday, he referenced how scouting really liked the makeup of Reed Garrett. Some of the guys that I'm sure are still with the Mets and part of that front office. So we've really seen just a collective effort on this bullpen. And it just feels like they have 4, 5, 6 guys that they trust at any given time. and they've done a great job cycling in relievers. That's another interesting comment from Stearns when he was asked about the workload this bullpen has had. He said, I think we've done a good job of bringing in fresh arms a bunch to keep that bullpen fresh. And he said, there hasn't been one guy that really has been taxed. Reed Garrett is the one that's really carrying this big workload. But here you are through how many games the Mets played at this point? I'm never the guy that knows like the standings off the top of my head or the games played. So 29 games. You're sitting here with 29 games played and you've won 15 of them. And Edwin Diaz and Adam Ottavino are both sitting at 10 2/3 innings pitched. I mean, they have really been able to manage these guys and protect them. That's been huge. And then you have the guys that maybe have a little bit more of the rubber arms and Garrett and Lopez that have been able to pitch a ton. And then you have the guys that have cycled in and out. And the guys that have cycled in and out, like a Daniel Nunez, have been really good as well. So I think moving forward, like I said in the last segment there's questions about this lineup. You know, a lot of the star players on this team are not performing to the back of their baseball card. And it's concerning. We're getting into the second month of the season. You got to give them time. They still have 5 months to turn it around and put together great years. But it's a full month in now. And some of the starts have not been there. The rotation. You right now feel good about Luis Severino. You feel pretty good that Quintana is going to be solid for you. And you're hopeful with Senga coming back. And I think you can even be hopeful in the depth. But with that said, there's still question marks in this rotation. Sean Manaea is a question mark. He's got good results, but it could have gone the other way in a lot of these starts. Jose Budo, still unproven. Adrian Hauser, get him off this team. By the way, I didn't get a chance to mention this on yesterday's show because honestly, I hadn't had an opportunity to watch the David Stearns press conference. But he has confidence in-house, as he says. A guy that he's watched for a long time with Milwaukee. There's definitely a personal relationship there. You can't avoid that one. I'm sure Stearns will still make the tough decision if he has to, but it makes sense that he's getting some more opportunities, although I don't know how many more chances he's got if he has another blow-up start. But the point is, I got a little off track there. The rotation of the lineup, you can poke some holes in. You can ask some questions there, and those could be the things that hold the Mets back from reaching their fullest potential this year. But unlike in years past, particularly last year, the bullpen's not going to be an issue. The bullpen is a real strength that's going to help the Mets outperform what they probably should be as a team and maybe remain 500 or over 500 throughout this season, because when they get a lead late, they're holding on to it. And when they inherit a bad start, they can keep a game close, and the Mets hopefully can come back in some of these as well. So it's been really impressive to see. And at this point, it's clearly the strongest facet of this team. Now, can the lineup, I don't know if they'll ever supersede them, but can the lineup get on that level? I want to talk about that next, how everyone is going to get at bats now that Marte's back, the decision on Vientos. We'll go through everything with this lineup in this roster in just a minute. First, though, today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. It's my favorite time of the show where I get to tell you about the app that is monopolizing a lot of my free time these days. Of course, I'm talking about Monopoly Go. I'm sure you've heard of it. It's been downloaded over 150 million times. It's a great twist on the classic Monopoly where you play not one, but hundreds of Monopoly boards in crazy locations, building up amazing cities, and they will bring you that big money. The best part, you can play with your friends and charge them rent on your iconic properties, just like your classic Monopoly, or you can even get a little bit nefarious and you can rob their vaults of their riches for yourself. There's leaderboards that will show you who the biggest Monopoly tycoons are. There's also time tournaments that are played around the world to earn huge rewards. So get in the game and join your friends. Download Monopoly Go now, free on the App Store or Google Play. Today, when the news came out that Mark Vientos had been DFA'd, I got a lot of texts. I was just scrolling through before I hit record here about Joey Wendell. Why is Joey Wendell still on this team? As much as I would have loved to see the Mets just lean into bats, and kept Mark Vientos on this roster, it didn't make sense. It didn't. The only move that would have allowed Vientos to stay is if Brett Beatty went down. That's what I talked about on yesterday's show. You need both of these guys to play. And if either of them is on the bench and they're trying to scrap for playing time when you have right now 5 viable outfielders on your roster. You have JD Martinez who's going to clog up the DH spot. It just doesn't make sense to have Mark Vientos on this roster to just pinch hit against a couple lefties and maybe start against a lefty and platoon with Beatty at third. And you need Joey Wendell. As much as I hate him being on the roster, you need some player who can fill in that infield or the utility infield role, the guy that can start at shortstop if Lindor goes down or if Lindor needs a day, although he typically doesn't. Same thing with Jeff McNeil. McNeil's probably going to be in a lineup every day. And I think Brett Beatty has reached a similar status. I think just because Joey Wendell's on the team doesn't mean he's going to start many games. He might get the occasional start for McNeil or Beatty, one start every couple weeks to keep him somewhat fresh. But he's just a guy that's sitting on the bench to play defense. And it's been frustrating for me and for many of you that when he has played defense, he hasn't played well. But if it wasn't Wendell, it would be somebody else who's barely playing on this team. So I don't think it's enough to get worked up about when Vientos goes down, because Vientos had to go down. He needs to be playing every day at third base, because if Brett Beatty doesn't hit throughout May and you eventually decide, all right, we're giving Vientos his shot, you want to make sure Vientos is ready for that opportunity, just like he was ready to come up in, a pinch and deliver a huge victory to the Mets. So we'll see Vientos throughout the year, and hopefully he makes the most of all his opportunities. And if he does and he puts up good numbers in AAA, you never know. Maybe he's a piece that can get moved to the deadline and he can get sent to a situation where he's going to get more opportunities. But looking at what's here. So we saw tonight, Starling Marte activated, but they gave him the day. DJ Stewart started the game in the outfield, as did Tyrone Taylor and Brandon Nimmo, of course, in left field. So it led me to wonder, how are they going to split up the playing time? I love to see Stewart get the start because he's swinging a good bat, and it paid off in a massive way. How much is Harrison Bader's playing time going to get eaten into? I think it could be a significant amount. Here's really where I'm at. The Mets have to think about the splits. They have to. Tyrone Taylor, as I yelled about on yesterday's show, sitting 325 versus right-handed pitching this year with an 889 OPS. Got another hit tonight. Versus lefties sitting 208 with a 458 OPS. Bader this year has been about even splits. 280 against lefties, 276 against righties. But his career tells a different story. And the eye test tells a different story as well. He has looked blown up sometimes against tough right-handed pitching. Against lefties, he's always comfortable in the box. Then you have Starling Marte, who's hitting 253 against righties this year, a 665 OPS. Against lefties, hitting 429. He's been unbelievable against left-handed pitching. I will note, though, he has hit 3 of his 4 home runs against righties. Now, Marte is going to be in there most days, but I do believe that the Mets will rest him a little bit. So here's what I looked at. Let's just say you're playing 6 games. It's 2 3-game series in a week. How can the Mets manage this playing time so everybody gets a little bit? Well, you have your guys that are in their 30s, and Marte and JD Martinez. You can give them a day, and you can allow them to be bats that come into big spots off the bench, during a game. So they get 1 at bat instead of 4. For Martinez, he's off his feet most times anyway, but still give him a little extra time. And for Starling Marte, get him off his feet, having to be in the outfield for all those games. So if you do that, let's just say you have 18 starts in a 6-game span between 2 outfield spots, subtracting Nimmo's, of course, and the DH spot. You have 18 starts to go around. Well, in a 6-game span, JD Martinez is going to start 5 of those games. Starling Marte probably starts at least 5 as well. So that's 10 of them. That means you got 8 starts to divide up across a set of 2 series between DJ Stewart, Harrison Bader, and Tyrone Taylor. When there's a lefty on the mound, the Mets should roll with this lineup every time. You should have Nimmo, of course, Bader in center, Marte in right. That should be the outfield. JD Martinez at DH. Tyrone Taylor off the bench, as is DJ Stewart. Against right-handed pitching, Nimmo is going to be in there. Marte typically going to be in there. And then they got some decisions to make. Maybe it's when Marte's out, that's when you slide DJ Stewart into right field like we saw in this game. Then the other starts are going to go to Bader and Taylor, and they can pretty much split them down the middle in center field. So what does that mean? 8 starts. DJ Stewart DHs 1 game when JD Martinez sits. He plays right field when Starling Marte sits a game in a week, right? Meanwhile, Taylor and Bader in a complete timeshare in center field, with Bader starting against all lefties and some righties, and Taylor getting a starts against right-handed pitching. If you go with that strategy, which I think is something close to what we'll see, it's all fluid. It's not going to be that set in stone, but you're always going to have one of Harrison Bader or Starling Marte off the bench to hit against left-handed pitching. And you're always going to have DJ Stewart or Tyrone Taylor on the bench to hit against a tough righty. This team is deep. There's outside of Joey Wendell and the catchers, and Nito's swinging it pretty good right now. There's not a lot of weak spots in this lineup offensively. The weakest players right now have been the stars, who have to get better. And then you have JD Martinez, who's still shaking off the rust, almost in extended spring training right now. And he's 5 for 17 because he's just that good of a hitter. So I think with JD Martinez being this always present threat in the middle of the lineup, with Beatty, McNeil, Lindor, Nimmo, and even Alonso still capable of reaching higher and being better offensive players. And then those other guys, the combination of Marte, Taylor, Stewart, and Bader in the outfield, I think this lineup is due to put up some good numbers. And also defensively, I think they're going to be really strong as well, because I think the infield defense has been great. And as long as you're keeping Nimmo and one of those center fielders out there, 2/3 of your outfield is going to be pretty strong defensively. The times where eventually you might start all 3 of those guys with Nimmo, Taylor, and Bader, and that could be your end of game defense, it's going to be really good. When Marte and Stewart are out in right field, it's obviously one of the weak spots for the Mets, but something they can get around and really have a lot of success. So I like the way this team is presently constructed. We'll just see what's going to happen now with this rotation, but it feels like the bullpen is always going to be changing, but it's a real strength. And this lineup now, I think, is pretty locked in stone until an injury pops up. And it's a deep team. It's a really deep team. It feels like it's a deeper team than the Mets have had in a couple of years. Even looking back to 2022, I'm not sure that team had the stars playing much better. But I think about large stretches of the season where you had Darren Ruff, or before that, you had JD Davis and Dom Smith. And, even Guillorme had a great year, but I think that this team, just when it comes to being deep, is better. And if the stars get back to playing like 2022, this team can roll. So I'm excited with what the Mets have right now. I'm looking forward to seeing them try to get ahead on the Cubs in this series against a very tough pitcher in Shota Imanaga. It's going to be a lot of fun to get eyes on him for the first time. I'll be talking about everything from the game on tomorrow's show. So make sure if you're listening on the audio side, you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. We're trying to make a push to 9,000 subs. So I appreciate all of you who subscribe. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention this. My dad has a podcast, and I was on it for his 100th episode. I'll tweet this out today. Athletes to Entrepreneurs, the Alumni Journey. I also put a link of it in the episode description as well. So if any of you want to watch me in a different setting entirely, I hosted my dad's show and interviewed him. So if you want to learn more about him even, it was a fun conversation. So make sure you check that out. And also, of course, as always, the NBA playoffs, the NHL playoffs going on right now. And of course, Major League Baseball in full swing. Make sure you head over to watch Locked On Sports Today on YouTube, the first ever 24/7 streaming channel that covers everything in the world of sports, with our local hosts from each team, league-wide hosts from each league. Find Locked On Sports Today streaming 24/7 on YouTube.